Good evening. I'm Julie with Snyder and Associates, so I'll probably do most of the talking, but feel free to jump. Anyone can jump in at any time. It's really kind of three parts. We're going to kind of just go through some of the things, touch on what the comp plan says about this overlay specifically, and some of the visioning work that was done back when you were creating the comp plan and getting community input. We'll talk about zoning and zoning overlay districts, specifically the different types, to kind of get the thought process of what you may or may not want for the area. And then we have a separate web page for just for this group that you can interact with. And we have some kind of polling questions and then a place to leave comments and some other information on there too. So it's kind of three parts and we will get started. Let's see here. So again, this is for the 169 South Overlay District. This is, you guys know your community, but Highway 169, and on the east side over here, this area, south of this residential area, and then there's a little gap of county, I believe, before the Kansas City city limits begin. That is on annex at this time, right? That little stretch to the south. Yep, okay. So really the visioning for this area says, mixed use, higher density resident housing, whether that means mixed use or apartments or, a higher, more intensive use in single family anyway. Multimodal connections. There isn't a trail system or a park in this area right now, but think about ways that we could connect into the existing infrastructure that exists, or areas that you may want or think would be nice to have those features as the area develops in the future. It should be zoned for, the zoning should include industrial spaces, flex space, light industrial. It seemed like you wanted to go after some of those uses that don't yet exist in Smithville, maybe some biotech, some research, different types of retail and office. And then also with that housing in there, you can give an opportunity for living for people that don't want to live in the Kansas City area, specifically, or maybe in another surrounding community, but work from home or don't mind a short commute. Really, Smithville itself and this specific overlay is in a really good spot for potential development and economic impact to the community. They have this arc of innovation, and Kansas City area is known as, I guess when I was doing my research, I read that it's one of the areas in the country with the most research and dense industry related to animal science and animal research and vet services. So you kind of fall in that area. So when you search the arc of innovation and you do your research, you can see on this map on the left, these are all points and dots of towns and plate locations where some of those industries already exist. So you can see Smithville is not on this map. So that's something to think about because of your proximity to other locations that do exist, those businesses, those industries, those employment centers, and the airport. Is that something you want to tap into business-wise and economic-wise, or is that something, again, you just maybe want to go after, capture maybe some of that potential residential population? So just something to think about as we move forward. This is directly from your comprehensive plan. So again, it calls for mixed use, higher density residential and or commercial. Uses that should be considered are that multifamily residential, commercial, flex developments, possible higher education facilities. I know there was some language in your comp plan that talked about the opportunity for those types of services given what exists in the surrounding areas, and mixed use developments. I think a lot of times people think vertical with mixed use, with residential over commercial, but that's not the only way that mixed use has to exist. So just help you with your visioning and imaging in your head of what that might look like. But it really seems like you want to go towards something that's going to really have a substantial impact for your community, for Smithville, that doesn't already exist, but yet still being different than what does exist. You know, it's not intended to compete with the retail of your downtown area or any of the existing industries in town. It's also located between two identified gateways from the comp plan. Both are highways, so that's a great place to capture traffic. Well, again, whether that's commuter traffic coming in or out, or ease of people to get to work, get to the airport, get into Kansas City, or commute to other communities around. And then these are some strategic, you did a lot of visioning. They had key actions for different areas in the comp plan. And these were some key action areas, and all four of these kind of speak to this area of Smithville in the overlay zoning district, what we're trying to do with it, you know, focus on technology and bioscience, leverage the airport, pursue tourism-related business potential. Maybe not so much that one, but if you're really going for flex space, and depending on what your residential looks like, you could connect into that one as well. Excuse me, and then a dedicated industrial zone. So I know the area to the north is more industrial focused, but you could think of industrial uses in this area potentially could be a light industrial that maybe has an office component and some light manufacturing or some you know, maybe some creative space or some warehousing area that's mostly office, mostly retail, but does have some room for that small manufacturing. Or if it's a bioscience use, you know, some room for those lab uses and those research facilities. So that's kind of a quick touch on your comprehensive plan. You guys know your community well, but wanted to get that background in there again so we could have that on the top of our minds as we think through potential zoning and what we may want to do with that zoning district. So it calls for an overlay district. So what is an overlay district? It's basically you're going to still have your base zoning district, whether it is, I think today it's probably agricultural since it's green space, it's not developed. You know, what does that look like then for your base district? Is it going to be a commercial, a B1, 2, 3? Is it going to be one of your residential ones? I don't believe you have a zoning district right now that allows for both of those in one zone as in your zoning code today. So what that zoning overlay is going to do, it's going to add in those uses that are missing, whether they exist in other zoning districts, like residential, for instance, apartments, and then also use land uses that don't maybe exist in your code today anywhere that you want to allow. You can do more restrictive, less restrictive regulations, such as for parking. You can include design guidelines. So really, it gives you an opportunity to put in what you think you're missing and what you want. This is an example of an overlays, a zoning map for another community. So you can kind of visualize what it would look like on the zoning map. So you have this darker yellow color would be like your residential. This one specifically was residential medium density. And there's a couple overlay districts on this plan. The OSFC is single family conservation. So and then the H is the overlay zoning district for a historic. So not only is it a historic neighborhood, so it has lots of design guidelines that you have to follow when you're in this neighborhood to preserve the historic integrity of the buildings and the structures and the uses. But it also has a single family overlays, which controls, allows for different lot sizes since they're, you know, it's an older part of town, so they're not as large as you might see, larger lots as you might see, but it'll still allow for that infill development and lot combinations and things like that. So that's what it might look like. This one over here is a hospital. So happens to be a hospital located Oh wait, no, that's historic. This one over here, sorry, is hospital. So just so you kind of can visualize what it would look like on a zoning map if a citizen or a developer was like, what is this property zone? This is how they would, this is a way to identify it. You could identify it as well with some hatching, but um, so what kind of zoning code should overlay should be created for this district? That's that's what we need to hear from you. There's really two main types of zoning. There's several, but the two that I guess are the most predominant are your standard zoning, which is pretty much what Smithville has, which most communities have. It's what you think of when somebody says zoning. It's going to separate your land use zoning, your land uses primarily, and it's going to require parking and dictate those uses. So it's going to be use forward and it's going to tell you make it very clear what you can and cannot do in that zoning district. And then form based is it really looks at what the built environment is going to look like and what that's going to feel like. And then the use comes second. So if you go more form-based, you're going to want you can go as deep as you want. You know, it can be anything from 2 or 3 story buildings, and you have to have a certain percentage of glass transparency on the street level, or you can go, you know, depending on the community and the zoning and what you're trying to achieve, you could get into building materials, you can get into specific types of landscaping, things like that. This is a typical transect, which you see in a lot of form-based codes, or when people try to explain it or describe it. You kind of have zones from the most intense urban type of setting down to your traditional, more rural, suburban. I would say an overlay zoning for this, if you really want to mix uses and get more dense housing and include some commercial in there, you'd probably want to be in this, like, envision something along T4 or T5, the general urban or the urban center. You know, it might not look as dense as this. The gray is representing buildings, the green is representing open space, but just something to think about. You know, they'd be pulled up to the streets more. Another thing that's really important when you go more form over use is what that public realm looks like, the streets, the sidewalks, things like that. And then you can also do a hybrid overlay code, which I think really, I mean, again, I don't want to guide the conversation and tell you what I think you should do. But that's probably the overlay will end up being, to some extent, is more of a hybrid of the two of these rather than one over the other. I mean, if you were going to go completely standard type of zoning, you would just create a new zoning code. But that's not the purpose of this. The purpose is to create this overlay. Oops, I'm clicking the wrong arrow. I apologize. So Smithville zoning today, like I said, is what you would think of when you think of Euclidean is the name of it, or standard zoning. So your B2, 3, and 4 are might be what you would have for a base district right today if you were going more after your office and commercial and industrial uses. You would get more of a pad site development. It's going to say more, it's going to regulate kind of your floor to air to site ratio. It's going to control your parking, you know, how much of the build site can or can't, should or shouldn't be covered with building versus parking, your setbacks. It's more reactive, and it doesn't really address what the building looks like at all or what the site looks like. You just kind of, here's your regulations and they go make it work. Here's an example of a zoning code. This is not from Smithville, this is somewhere else, but you can say it has that FAR, a minimum lot area. Your lot typically has to be a certain size and width and area in a lot of standard zoning districts. You know, here's your setback lines when it's on a street or if it's not on a street, if it's a front or rear, how much of the lot is building coverage, height limitations, things like that. So it's really site specific. A form-based code is a little different. So you're going to get more of a suggestion or a range. You might get a build to zone, as you see in this diagram. So here's the property line. You should put your building anywhere between 0 setback at the property line or 10 feet, for example. I'm just making numbers up. How much window should there be? Do you want your floors to be a certain height? If you want to regulate stories versus building height, if you want 3 stories, how tall should each story be? What does that first floor versus second floor look like in the design? And if you want to regulate the uses on each of those levels, you can. These are just examples of things that it regulates. The density, you can have a higher density because you'll have these mixed use, more likely to have mixed use buildings or more likely to have multi-unit buildings. And you can regulate building materials if you like. It's really kind of up to you. So again, probably going to combine a little bit of these features with your standard zoning, and bring you to a hybrid zoning code. Hybrid zoning code, you don't have to go into the design of the building, but you would regulate maybe the uses, the stories, and the setbacks differently. This would be an example of a hybrid code, a zoning code. Again, this is from a different community, but here you have a setback related to the street, not just street in general, which a lot of times your standard zoning does. It just looks at a side street or a front street. This is looking at what's on that street, what type of development do they want on that street. Landscaping, parking is different than other uses. It might be, again, require less parking than the other, than your standard zoning. You can allow for reduced parking based on your use or combination of uses, shared parking, things along those lines.
Hey, Julie, there's a question in the chat. Rob asked, how often do people ask for variances in the form-based?
Well, so how often is it's hard to say for certain because it allows for that flexibility. One thing that I need to talk about if you do more form-based or design-based, it is a little more work for staff at the staff level because it's going to give people that flexibility. So it's not going to be as specific as a standard zone. So staff will have a little bit of flexibility to say, yes, this meets the standard, it meets the intent, you can do this, but it does still allow, or no, you need to apply for a variance. So it does happen. You would do variances, and I don't know if you do use permits in conditional or special use permits in Smithville, but those would still be options that could be included in the code as well. Another type of code that I've never seen one strictly performance based. There are performance codes that you might want to think of if these are types of things that are important to include for this overlay district and what the vision is for this area as it develops. Performance regulations might be, a use that can only have so many semi-deliveries a day, or it can only operate certain hours or certain days of the week. Something that regulates how the use functions. So again, that's something you can do in your with your use permits if you do those on a case-by-case basis, or you can make it apply to all drive-throughs. No drive-throughs allowed on Sundays. I don't know, I'm just making that up. But those are some performance type standards that you might want to think about if those are important to you, that you could include into your hybrid zoning code. What does residential look like if you include it in this area? So here's just some examples, again, just visuals to kind of get our minds working. This area is over 300 acres. And in that envisioning from the comp plan, it does encourage a higher density residential that Smithville doesn't have currently. So what does that look like? Here's like a true walk-up building in a form-based neighborhood. The way this is designed, it could be residential on the first floor and second floor. One unit could be vertical, they could be horizontal. Um, and it really depends on how high you want to go, what your preferences are. Here's kind of this is the top left is your typical, sorry, that was the bottom right. You probably can't see my mouse where I'm pointing. On the top left is a standard suburban textbook subdivision. You have your required lot width, your required lot depth, your required setbacks. Um, so if you want to keep the residential completely separated from office, industrial, commercial, whatever those types of uses might be, what do you want it to look like? Do you want it to be a standard subdivision? Do you want something maybe on the right side where it's a combination of both? This bottom right one is kind of a pocket neighborhood, they call them. So you have green space in between you, and then the driveway and the parking might be on the back or in one area at the end of the development. Here's kind of a little bit more urban uh, residential layout with a little bit of alleys where everybody parks off the rear, and then you have your traditional streets up front. They are pulled up to the streets. They're a little bit closer together. So yeah, what do you want to see that residential mixed in with the commercial industrial, or do you want to keep it separate, or does it matter, right? Um, and then what do the streets look like? The top left is a standard street design that you see all over in any town USA. You have your lanes, you have your medians, you have your sidewalks. It may or may not have a bike lane. Your buildings are set further back off the street. Um, or do you want it, it doesn't have, the end product doesn't have to be this intense or this dense. But do you want those buildings pulled up to the street? Do you want it to be more walkable? These are things that would be, if you go more design-based, form-based, walkable, these are things that you would consider in this bottom graphic. The sidewalk, furniture, your travel lanes might be a little bit more narrow than you're used to, or they could, even if they don't lose a couple feet, physically, they might feel a little bit more narrow because you're putting more on the street. And you're having that pedestrian and those sidewalks are right next to the buildings, whereas typically we're used to seeing the yard between the building and this sidewalk in most developments. Um, so that's really kind of a quick walkthrough. Again, this is kind of just to get our minds working. And so to hear back from you guys what the vision is gonna be, what you want the vision to be for this neighborhood as it develops, or this area as it develops. Are there things that we should consider that I haven't mentioned? Are there things on your mind that you feel we should regulate, like affordable housing or green infrastructure? I've seen codes that have included for like a residential building, an apartment building, and townhomes that they can only use electric. They couldn't use gas because some communities have really green and eco-friendly codes. Affordable housing is a hot topic, so I've seen all over the country. So I've seen codes that have included regulations that require a certain percentage when it comes to housing of affordable units. Again, I've talked about those. I mentioned some performance regulations, business types. Yeah, are there businesses or industry types that you want to make sure are excluded? We don't want to write general retail in there and then, you have competing businesses with downtown, because I think that's exactly what you don't want to happen here. So I don't know if we want to have a little bit of a discussion now, open discussion before we go to the webpage. And look at that, because that's another way that you can provide feedback, not only tonight, but it'll be left open and you'll have access to it. So you can think about things too. So you don't have to, on that website, you don't have to respond tonight if you don't want to. We do have a couple quick poll questions just to get your feedback initially tonight on some things, so we can discuss with staff and can continue work on overlay district. But yeah, and then it is a private web page, so the public won't be able to see it. We can share out results to the public at a later time if that's what you guys prefer and want to do. But it's just really a way to let it's a lot of information and it's a lot of things to think about because it's going to address and consider things that don't exist in Smithville currently. So we thought it was good to have that open, that webpage open, and then have a discussion too tonight.
Julie, this is Melissa. One thing I would like to see in this, I kind of look like that the hybrid would be kind of nice. It might be something different than we're used to seeing in our area, like the Kansas City area. I don't know for sure about that, but maybe trying to be more open to possibly what could be done there. The one thing I'd like to see, and I know when we interviewed, I talked about this then even, because I was in on your interview, was with that subdivision to the north of this area. I would like to see maybe the northern part of this overlay look more at like residential, maybe like single family detached, like the smaller, like our R1D. And then as you go further south into this property, then looking at the moderate to higher density as it would go south if we do real estate or residential.
Okay.
So
So
those are
you're
my two comments right now, anyway.
okay. So you're kind of envisioning more of a residential separate from and kind of the intensity and the density kind of stepping back and getting less as you get closer to the existing neighborhood.
Yes.
I was gonna say too, in like doing some research and looking at areas around the Kansas City area, I know Kansas City has a few overlay districts already that are more form-based and design oriented, but I feel like that's kind of I don't know. Compared to Smithville, it's a bigger city and it's probably hard to like name a place and be like, "Oh, yes, I've been there. I know exactly what you're talking about." So you might want to think of things like, and I don't know if they're built or not or in the process of development, but Kearney has they have design standards in their historic district. They have a mixed use residential and a business park that they control design in. Um, they have a complete street plan that's going to kind of dictate the design of the streets, like I showed, and it's going to consider that multimodal design. Um, so I'm just was trying to think of things that might be put things into context in a built environment that are close to you that you may not be that you may be familiar with or may drive by and notice later. Kearney has like what was it called? Like I feel like I-35 or West 35 development where they have some kind of form-based commercial. It's more retail, like lifestyle retail center, entertainment district. But again, not that this area would look like that, but it gives you an idea of what form and function are like rather in comparison to the traditional zoning code.
Deb Dotson here. I've got a few things too. I agree. I like the hybrid style of zoning because that allows some flexibility and some architectural interest. I also like the idea of walkability that was discussed quite a bit early on, that people were looking for something where they could actually walk from where they lived or where they worked, grab a bite to eat, get a drink, visit with friends, things like that. There is a development, it's a long time development, but it's improved greatly over near the Parkville area where you've got Sprouts, you've got medical, you've got um, apartment complex, you've got live, work, play concept over there. And now I'm assuming that that is a hybrid form of zoning.
Yeah, I had their web page pulled up too. They have yeah, they had a develop. I wonder if that's what I was looking at and reading about. Yeah, they have like a Highway 45 corridor plan. I mean, some of their plans are, over 5 years and aren't that done, aren't that recent, but they have a Parkville master plan or a newer, kind of comp plan that goes into design and sustainability and some of those high extra code requirements or regulations.
I do like the opportunity to have more of an architectural interest uh, and stay with some walkability because I was just in downtown Smithville Saturday and the walkability, the new restaurants, all of that, there was a lot of people out. So that's the kind of thing I would like to see on that south end too, if possible, as part of the mixed use. And proximity for young professionals to hit the highway, the airport, and whatever, and just make the whole vibe more welcoming for the whole city. Something for everybody, that kind of thing.
Mhm.
Deb, if I could, this is Jack. I'd like to ask you a question about your statement. What would you see, based upon what you talked about, as the employment focus in this development with what you're talking about?
The employment focus, I'm not sure. I mean, research would be nice to have here. I'm not sure how that would exactly fit in with the walkability residential side unless there was more separation of it. Um, I see our demographics are changing quite a bit here. More wealth, if you will, more, I think more professionals coming in, that sort of thing, office space, uh, research.
Hi, it's Adam. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Uh, Going off what you just said with the office space, that actually would help out with the downtown retail commercial if because we have a lot of office professionals that are in those buildings, so the buildings aren't generating sales tax revenue because they have like professional services in there, lawyers, psychologists, counselors. If there was an other place for them to go, that might open up those buildings so that more retail and commercial could move in there. So I think having office spaces in something like this, because that's what we've been talking about on the EDC for a couple years now. If this is an opportunity to put in some small office spaces where our professionals can go, that I think would be a net benefit.
I would also like to see more medical come to Smithville. We don't have enough medical here in Smithville right now. Um, I think that if we had a more vibrant area, we would attract perhaps some higher quality medical facilities.
One last question slash comment to you, Deb, on your stuff, just to kind of probe a little further. Um, the industrial type flex uses versus the residential, I kind of understand how distant those two can be sometimes in your thought process. But if you addressed it through a form-based code that didn't allow the industrial buildings to look so much like a square box industrial building, but had more of a kind of a softer residential feel or an office feel associated with it, at least in the built environment, would that be something that could come
Yeah,
together for you?
yeah, I think that would work. I'm looking at the aesthetics here. Like I said, the architectural detail of different places, it does make a difference. This is going to be coming into our city from the south, and we want to put our best foot forward in a higher attention to detail for the architectural elements, I think would help us put a better face on people coming in and welcoming. Too many people have complained about, well, when we come to Smithville, all we see is storage units. Well, this is an opportunity to come into Smithville and see something that's more attractive.
I want to back off of what Deb said there. One thing we talked about when we were going through this process of the comp plan and the strategic plan is we wanted people to know that they were really leaving Kansas City and coming to Smithville. And I think with what she has said there of trying to make it more inviting would go a long ways that way. And I'd like to second what Adam said about trying to, maybe we could have the residential on the north side if we go that route, then look at your professional buildings, and then as you go further south, more into the industrial, if there's enough acreage for all of that to work in this proposal.
And there was a question in the chat from Steve. He asked, does mixed housing and light industrial work on one area? Can there be separation so the housing is not next to the light industrial?
I think we can write the code. However, that's the beauty of the hybrid or the overlays. We can write it how it works for your community. So yeah, we can absolutely, if that's the way the group feels and that's kind of the vision. One thing to think about, it is hard when you say the word industrial, the context is automatically a manufacturing, or at least that's what comes to my mind. But when I've been looking around and I've, worked on previous projects, computing space and manufacturing different materials with technology has gotten smaller and less noisy for certain things, right? Or people are doing more lab work. So, but it would be under traditional code definition. Those definitions, those labs might still be under an industrial definition, but in today's world, maybe we need to think of it a new land use name for it, or classify what industrial is maybe it's research industrial, or not use the word industrial at all. But then still, that doesn't mean they have to be next to each other at all either, or in the same building. They can still be separated. One thing your code also allows for is a concept plan to be done with development. Again, this is over 300 acres. I don't think when talking with staff and reading the comp plan, I don't think the intent of the overlay is to create this planned community where this is what it will look like and we should have these uses here. So maybe you think about it, as so many, is it an acreage amount or a percentage amount will be, dedicated to residential, and it has to be, southwest of this point or something, so there's flexibility.
I like flexibility. While you've got what might residential look like, I'm looking at the two bottom ones, and those are more attractive to me than your standard residential stack them and pack them. The two bottom ones are more pleasing. They appear to be walkable, appear to be more friendly and welcoming, and probably would appeal to a large demographic. Especially young professionals that have to get to a plane or the airport, or even down Kansas City.
And I have a question for Jack. I imagine doing the smaller, like pocket type neighborhoods, is it easier to hook up water and sewer? Like, does that bring the cost down for developing those units versus a traditional subdivision when it comes to building out that type of infrastructure?
I mean, infrastructure is always the key element. That's why we're getting on this early. Currently, there's water along the highway, nothing else available in that entire area. So getting sewers in there, getting adjacent to it, that's part of what Julie, I think, was talking about with the conceptual plan stuff. Um, Individual developers can come in and say, here's what I propose for my 80 acres I own of this 350. Does it meet your layout guidelines or whatever the guidelines happen to be? But they have to address that because we require generally developers to pay their own freight on everything. They've got to put in their own water, their own sewer, etc. So if they're doing it, that becomes a critical element of how it happens. That's why in this scenario, I would fully anticipate the stuff by the highway would develop first and it would work its way up further away. Simply because you got to extend utilities each time. If that answers your question.
I can bring up the web page too, because that we created for the group, because that has some more visuals. Some of I tried not to use the same one, so if one is repeated, I'm sorry, but so I tried to use different ones. Okay, can you see my screen? And the web page has your logo on it.
It is still the PowerPoint.
It is, oh, because I always have to click share. I opened it and then forgot to click share. There we go. How about now?
Yep, you're good.
Okay. So again, this is a private, right now it's private website. There isn't anything, you can't just Google, I'll share the link with you in the chat in a minute. You can't, if you have this link, you can see it, but you can't do a search, a Google search and bring it up. So, we were playing around to make sure it all worked earlier. I guess we didn't get that cleared out. But so again, here's kind of the area. Here's a link to the presentation that I just went through. If you want to go back and look at slides and think things over, it's set to open in a new window, so you can click back and forth between the two. We'll get to the quick polls here in a second. So we have like 3 quick questions here to go through tonight, quick, and then we have a couple visual questions. So one of them is what development layout should be the vision for the office and or industrial development part of the overlay. So here's kind of and you can click on them and see them a little bit better. Oops. Oh, that didn't work. So this is a development. It's a research park. So they have a lot of green space in between it, and it's kind of a hybrid. There's no residential in this area today. So here's kind of your traditional office and research and manufacturing uses in this corner. And they have lots of parking, but they're still really made an effort to, use the built environment, the natural topography to still make it inviting to the employees. Here's a real intense example. I don't foresee this area developing this intense, but just so you know, the opposite extreme of what you can go to. This would be form-based, really intense with residential and uses. Here's kind of that more traditional one that I showed in the presentation where each one is on its own lot. A lot of times too, a standard zoning code, not all the time, but most of the time, it only allows one building per lot, whether it's a residential, commercial, or an office building. So that's a lot of times when you do get this big separation between the buildings and an island of a sea of parking, because only one building is allowed per lot. A hybrid code or a form-based code would allow you to put more than one building on a lot. So this might be one lot with 2 buildings. This might be one lot. This could all be one lot. Depends on, again, that's going to depend on your developer and what you write, how you write the code and what the code allows. But when those developers come in with their plans and with their uses, it's going to give them a little flexibility if you write it that way. And then here's one that it's a standard, but again, it really keeps that environmental feel to it, the topography, and works with the natural environment. I have a different image, and I can add more images to this tonight if you guys want more examples as you come back and look at it later. There's another part of this one that is more of a hub zone, and it's form-based, and some of the uses share there's like one building that's called the hub, and they share meetings and the meeting spaces and lab spaces, and it's kind of that shared office co-op where you can just rent a desk and come in and use it or leave. And there's also like a deli in there, things like that. And then they're in the process of adding some apartments to that as well. So that would be, let me get out of this. There we go. So this is kind of a walkthrough of those four. And so then you would just click on which one you like or which one you prefer. We have one about the building and the street and what the relationship between the two and what feels good to you or what you would like to see, or what's a priority. Here's one story. You have that building right up to the street, but you have a patio area, a walkable area, and then parking right up against the building, on-street parking. This is a little more intense. It's multi-story. You don't see parking on this side. You might have some parallel parking on this side, but you do still have a wider sidewalk and some streetscaping elements to kind of break that up. This is a traditional office park. You have your building, you have your parking between the building and the street, and a required front yard landscaping zone and the street. So this really kind of spreads buildings out. Pushes them back further. It still looks nice. It's just how walkable, how do you want it to feel? This happens to be owned by them, so they have a trail for their own employees. Other users maybe won't have that ability because they don't have a largest lot or the natural features. And then your typical just commercial street corridor,
Some of the ones that are more utilitarian, I don't think that our citizens are going to find very welcoming when they come back from wherever they've gone. My opinion is I would like to see more of the green space, more of the natural and architectural design rather than something that's utilitarian.
And then we have one with mixed use buildings. Here's that one again, residential. Again, the way this is laid out, you could easily go vertical with your residential or horizontal. One unit could be both of those windows that you're seeing right here on the ground floor. Or one of those could be, you can kind of see two doors here. So this one is probably vertical, but you could just as easily envision a residential unit that's horizontal.
I've seen that in Colorado. I've seen that same design in Colorado where you've got some retail on the bottom and then you have apartments and lofts above. And that seems to be very attractive as well.
Yeah. Yeah, so this one is similar to that then. It's a little more intense that it's taller, it has more stories, but it's still kind of limiting the width of each building, or kind of at least it might all be one building, but it might have a regulation that requires the facade to be broken up. So it might look like different buildings. It could all be one, but it could each be separate as well. But then you can also see it doesn't go on forever. You can see that break on the edge on the right side of the picture. So it's increasing the intensity of the building and the adjacent to the sidewalk, but it's not as intense and as dense as it could be. Here's one where it's just a traditional commercial street. You could have a code that requires, this one might require a break-in building or a break-in block length every so many linear feet, whereas this one, it's just going to go as long as you let it go, whether it's one building or separate buildings. But again, it's vertical. It feels more intense just because it's longer. And sometimes, again, sometimes the design gives you that feeling as well, just the building architecture features and design. And then you can always, write less intensive requirements where you get that more traditional type of Main Street feeling as well. So it might not be any of those, but you still can have residential above your commercial in your office, but it might feel more residential or more traditional.
My question for the group, for this south area, would we prefer it to lend itself more historical, the way our current downtown looks, or would we prefer to go in a more modern aesthetic? Something a little bit more avant-garde, something, just a newer type of architecture rather than go back with the old. That's something to think about too.
And you can regulate that as much or little as you want. When it comes to design regulations, you can just say, you have to have a top, middle, bottom to your building. You can see a lot of these have a distinct bottom, middle, and top. I feel when you don't have that bottom, top, bottom, I've had this debate with lots of people before. When you don't have that kind of break or those three elements, that's when you see more of that big box feel, right? Because there's no break in those facades. It's all one. There's typically not any features ground level that's different than the top of the building. You can say again, how much window space are you going to require? Or you can go as detailed as you can only, you have to use these building materials and have a list of allowed building materials. Or you can say, it has to be this architecture style, prairie architecture style, or, however you want to call it. The only thing is the more you regulate, the more staff time it's going to take and the more review time it's going to take. And depending on how those approvals and reviews go through, if it's not staff level, it's kind of, yeah, what works for staff, what also works for the community to get to the vision you want.
And Deb, just so a point to make, the more specific you are in the design, the smaller the market for that development becomes.
Good point.
Yeah,
Good
yeah,
point.
Jack. I've been kind of thinking about that. Listening to some of the comments and stuff. I mean, I don't know if we really want to get too restrictive on things. I want people to feel free to come up with plans and ideas, and maybe there's something that we're gonna miss if we regulate it too much. So I think we need to try to find ways to keep it still pretty easy in essence to submit a plan and get going here. I mean, I don't want to be a showstopper.
I
I
don't
concur.
either. I don't either. I'm just throwing out ideas for aesthetics to make the entrance into the city look more welcoming.
I concur because the more restrictions you put in there, the more time it's going to take to find developers that want to come in. Plus the fact that if you set all the rules, then you're going to also set up reasons for people to petition for adjustments to the code and to the zoning so they can come in. The the form-based and the hybrid model seems to be the best model for this area, where maybe you break it up into thirds. The farthest south is the light industrial parks, and then you come into the mixed hybrid residential business with the separation between those two being green space, and then just before you come to the city, you come into more residential area to make it, to Deb's point, more attractive to people coming into the city. But I think the more restrictive we are, the harder it's going to be to get people to develop. Uh, and we don't want to have land just sitting there not doing anything.
Yeah, and Terry, I completely agree, and Deb as well. I mean, yeah, we start big projects, down southern portion, and then as it keeps creeping up, and it gets more, more residential, so it matches that little neighborhood that's right there.
I
But I
like
mean,
that. I like
but
that.
but but we've got like, I mean, I don't know how this works in other cities, Julie, and I don't know if there's something that we can look at to equal that. But we've got these big data centers coming up down south, right? We got the Meta one, and then the Google one on the other side coming up. I mean, how can we capitalize on something like that, and bring in some of that tech industry possibly in some of that southern industrial area? Because that's kind of what I would think would be kind of cool if we can market ourselves as a city, as some sort of a tech startup type place where what we're wanting to build here.
That would definitely do us a lot of good, especially if we're going to looking into research. Silicon Smithville.
I don't think there's one answer or one way to do that. Um, those tech centers. So I'm in our Ankeny office and just on the north side of Des Moines, and West Des Moines has quite a few data centers, and those communities are offering a lot of incentives. So that's something that your economic development group in your city would need to think about. How what we're creating this zoning overlay, but then are there other steps the city will need to take or will need to consider? That's another conversation, and things to think about. Maybe some of that housing is what appeals to that employment base because it's right there next to the data. I know some of them don't have huge employment numbers. I think like some of them are, and some of them do have quite a bit of employment and people on site, but some of them don't. How are you going to market it to as well? Are you going to actively market it, the overlay and this as a new area ready for development? Um, you know, and I know that this is really design forward and a lot of and I maybe I'm leading it away. I didn't mean it to lead it any one direction. I just really wanted people to think about what things could be or what you might want to regulate. Um, there's no wrong answer.
Well,
I
that's kind
think
of
really
how
the
I
only
approached this meeting tonight, was thinking this is a brainstorm session where we thought about things, thought outside the box, and everybody brought up something that could work or okay, and then start poking holes in, or the flaws in the ideas. And I agree with John and Jack and Terry. They had great ideas. I think some of that is really good.
I think the only thing and I don't even know if it's a have to, the only thing that you might have to set up front is, and this would be a question for Sean with Snyder that's on with us, and Jack, since it is a highway, are those access points ready able to be changed? Those might be where they are. They might not be, but other than that, I don't think there's anything that you can or can't, be done, or at least considered.
Hmm.
this is Steve with EDC. Do we have any concerns or thoughts that as if this had more of a commercial shops, mixed housing, denser housing to it, would it pull away, would the gravity pull away from our downtown area? Is it going to, are we going to compete with downtown by putting too much commercial down here? And when I say commercial, I mean more shops and restaurants, not necessarily doctors and offices and professional offices, but any thoughts how we would it compete? Do we, is it okay for it to compete? Is it far enough outside the city? It's going to be its own little community and the gravity is going to pull them towards Kansas City and not Smithville.
If you want my opinion, I think that it probably will to some extent. But I mean, if you think about it though, I think we've had a lot of surveys and things done over the years, and you know, a lot of people are already shopping in Kansas City and spending their money down there anyways. So I mean, if we can somehow capture and steal some of the money that's going to Kansas City, and if they can just, you know, come a little bit further, right? We can get some of that that tax revenue from there. I mean, that also could be helpful for the city in the long run as well.
It's almost impossible to not you can't have a walkable like neighborhood if there's nowhere for them to walk to. So if they're going to shop or they're going to eat close to their house, and the point is to not have to drive, then eventually they're going to have to be restaurants and shops in that area that'll inevitably compete with downtown. But I don't think you can have a walkable community without like things for people to walk to do. Otherwise, they're just walking in green space, and that's more of just a traditional neighborhood with like a park. And I don't think that's what we were all looking at. We kind of want to do something different than the traditional suburbs. So yeah, I do think there will be competition, but I don't think there's anything we can really do about that if we do want some sort of multimodal, you know, walkable community where people can, you know, work, play, eat all in their little area. There's going to have to be something in there.
And they'll probably also come to the downtown area to do things too, because a lot of people like variety. I know I do. I don't want to go to the same thing all the time. And to John's point, I think we would be pulling from Kansas City and Gladstone and points south that would come up here because they don't want to go over to Metro North all the time. They don't want to go to Boardwalk all the time. This would be something new, and I think because of the proximity to other things up here, I think we would pull from Kansas City, Gladstone, and those areas. Maybe even Kearney and Platte City for that matter.
To Adam's point, I think to create the community that I hear being discussed, there would have to be retail in that mixed community to bring the younger professionals because they do want to walk and they want variety. Will it compete with downtown? Probably a little bit, but I think if we market it right, they could end up complementing each other. It takes a little bit of work, and to the point of if we build an area that has offices where the younger professionals that are in the downtown area would move to that business park, and we could put in more retail and variety in the downtown to enhance that area. So, I mean, there's a lot of concepts to think about here. Uh, but the overall idea is to make the city more inviting to people to come in and to include a business base that uh, will carry some of the burden for that development because you can't build a city on residential tax base only.
Jack, how difficult would it be to connect like a bike trail to that part of the city, to downtown?
Currently, it would be a challenge because we've got just so many gaps.
Yep.
But we're not all that far away over time. I think that's what's likely going to need to happen is rolling through there. There are transportation plan includes parallel roads on east and west of 169 to help ease the burden of travel down 169, and those would be the ideal opportunity to take those pathways, one side or the other. However that works. One thing I'd like to point out, there are two aspects of development at this location, and one is that as mentioned a bunch, is that it may bring people from Gladstone or Kansas City up into the area. But the more significant thing, I think, is if we can get people from Smithville to stop there instead of going to Kansas City, there's as much growth in our tax base that can occur in that scenario as bringing people from Kansas City up. Kansas City already gets a lot of our tax. So if we can stop them here, give them an alternative, I think that would be something we ought to think about. And lastly, I'll throw in the last 2 cents of this is competition with downtown is going to occur. It's going to occur in every new development we have. But in this, if we focus the concept of the scope of what kind of retail, what kind of, it's easy enough to regulate, but leave it really flexible to bring in housing, retail, et cetera, in this development without it directly competing or, absolutely competing with our downtown area. Limit the number of bars and cafes, but allow the other.
But are we really competing with downtown? Because the kinds of things that would be in this newer area would not necessarily be niche like what we have right now. Snack Daddies, Grassroots, the Wellco, Shops, Gizmos, those are all going to be different than would be in the newer area. So we've got the downtown niche versus the South End group. So I'm not sure that we would have too much regular competition. Yeah, people would be going back and forth, but I think we would have some synergy going on there rather than head-to-head competition.
And for the most part, I mean, I don't think that the people that are using that would be using, like, say, just for example, going to a restaurant, if there was one built here, I don't necessarily think those people are the ones that are going downtown anyways. So I think you're going to see more of the people that are at those Google data centers or whatever, or whatever else comes there. I think those are the folks that are going to see that and want to utilize those locations, and then hopefully some of those Metro North Nashua area people might want to come up here too. But I mean, I just don't see it competing too much because I just don't think these people are going to be going downtown anyways, for the most part.
I also think the kinds of businesses that this is going to attract, the price point to get into those buildings, I'm talking about the retail restaurant side. I mean, up by Price Choppers, $25 a square foot. Downtown is still $10 to $15 a square foot. So there's going to be a different kind of business going into the new construction areas than what is currently downtown. And if there are office spaces that draw the offices from downtown to the new areas, that will open up possibly affordable retail, if that's what we want to call that, downtown.
Good point.
And you're going to have to include something in this overlay district related to uses. If you want any type of mix of residential and commercial, that's not completely separated. And plus, there might be I don't know. I don't think there's an answer to this yet, but is all 300 acres going to get one base zoning district? Will it all be B3, or will the base district change with different developments as it develops? But you're going to have to address uses in this overlay. So maybe you say like maybe you create a neighborhood business category of like a dry cleaner or a pharmacy, or I'm just throwing things out there, that is different than you might see in your downtown right now.
I think it might be important to also consider, if we're going to try to draw businesses that are associated with that data center work going on in Kansas City, we probably ought to identify those businesses or industries that support those, that grow up around it, so that we can maybe focus this use pattern on those type of businesses, those or bioscience, or combined, with both of them in here, so that we, in order to encourage them with this program, this overlay district, we really need to have a hands on, who are we talking to? That's what we really need to know. Who are we talking to that we want to get bioscience in? We need to know what kind of businesses we can support. We're certainly not going to be a Beringer Ingelheim or a Phoenix, somebody giant that's with their labs and creating stuff, but they have to have businesses to support them too. Well, who are those? What are those businesses that we can?
Yeah, that's why I was kind of curious, what are some other towns done, that have put in data centers? How do they address the surrounding zoning? How have they addressed trying to figure out how to? And I know that, it was mentioned that there was some economic incentives, like maybe that's something we can, obviously the EDC can look into more possibly, but just from the zoning perspective, I mean, what should we do to attract stuff like that?
Yeah,
Has
from
anybody
zoning.
actually reached out to us? I'm sorry, has anyone from an ancillary business, like what we've got Meta out there now, has anyone, say, from Meta or anyone reached out to us to see about getting any support businesses up here? Have we had any inquiries, I guess is what I'm asking.
Jag, you're on mute.
Jack, you're muted.
I still can't hear, so
He's still muted.
somebody hold up a sign.
There you go.
Jack
He's
muted.
got it.
So, sorry, I had another screen up. At this point, Deb, we've been contacted substantially only by battery centers that would, power related. So they would buy the power from a power station, store it in batteries overnight, and sell it at the peak operating times when these data centers are really pulling energy. We've had 5 different folks over the last year and a half that have made contact.
Okay.
But other than that, no other business.
One of the things in the comp plan and in the visioning it mentioned was higher education. Is there a way to is there a community college or one of the universities or other colleges in the area that has a partnership with a business, a specific business or industry? Would they be willing, or is there a way we could have them come in and do kind of an incubator space or a workspace for those students that's hands-on, that's working with those, that's also, but maybe the company, it's the companies that pays for the space, builds out the space, but it's a partnership between the educational facility and entity and a business. I don't know if anything like that exists near Smithville right now.
Maple Woods perhaps, but I'm not aware of anything.
Gladstone has Northwest Missouri State.
Okay.
There's a career center somewhere between Smithville and Platte City, isn't there? Or is it at Platte City? Platte City.
I think it's a little further south than Platte City, but
Is it?
Sean works in the Kansas City area, so maybe he is more familiar with what you see or what do you see in the Kansas City area around these data centers. You know, the area here in the Des Moines area, it's just a couple miles south of a major retail area, and as far as like nearby land uses, it's more like it's more other large users, rec facilities, indoor recreational facilities. One of the colleges has put in a few buildings nearby, but it's more, yeah, large lot, single building type of development.
Yeah, typically you don't see a lot. The support data centers, they tend to be a lot of cities, kind of frown away from because they tend to be more of a big drain on they don't have a lot of employees, they take a lot of power, take a lot of land with very little value back in sales tax. It's mainly just property tax. So you don't see a lot of them going after data centers because of that. The batteries, I've heard the battery support that. The other thing you do hear some is there is some housing needs for them. Usually if there's some labor needs for them, usually electricians, technicians, usually the operators, some of that needs where you can have and help develop that. But I haven't really seen a nice supportive business that would be used in around the data centers. Usually you just see them fill a spot in a industrial park, and you have the industrial parks built around them with other uses. I do have a question I'll throw out there that I'm curious about. As far as the type of retails, is there any type of retail that you're concerned about bringing to town that may hurt other businesses? Say a Walmart, or is there something you want to try to keep from bringing to town, or write the code that would limit someone wanting to bring that to town? Or do we want to keep it open because having a more restrictive architectural code will deter some of your larger retail facilities nationwide that have their brand managed and they don't want to keep their brand look, so they don't want to be open to come into an area that's more restrictive. Is there anything that you want to make sure that we think about or include along those lines?
This is just my opinion. I'm not a big like box retailer. I came from the Northeast and saw 50 to 40, 40 to 50 years of traditional suburban development with box stores going in and mini malls going in. I think this is an opportunity to not do the same things that other communities have done and then put themselves in infrastructure deficit because of that type of building out. So, I mean, in my opinion, I'd rather see like smaller mom and pop shops and small business owners and not so much of a priority for franchises and big multinational corporations coming in. That's just my opinion.
I wouldn't want to see a community of tattoo parlors.
Or payday loans or pawn shops along that line, Steve.
Yeah, basically.
Well, based on the conversation, it seems like we're moving more towards form-based codes rather than the conventional zoning. So a lot of that could be written into the code. So again, you want to be careful on how strict you make it, but I think it can be written that you can limit some of those big bucks because, as you said, whether you're talking about Home Depot or Lowe's or place at Walmart, they have a look that they want, and they don't want to fight code to get into it. So I think that some of that can be eliminated by how the code is written, but based on the conversation, it sounds like we're going more towards hybrid and form-based codes rather than conventional zoning.
That's my favorite candy.
In the in the bottom part of the web page, there is a place for you to write any thoughts, comments, ideas, anything that you want to add as you think about it over the next few days or the next week or so. And then it will show up so other people can see it. And so then you can kind of thumbs up, thumbs down if you like it, if you agree. So it, they can write, they can add a comment in response. I can answer questions. Jack and Gina or somebody from the city, if it needs to be forwarded to them, they can provide a response as well. So just wanted to provide, a place for it to be interactive. There's a couple FAQs more on form-based just because it's so, it's just not something that you're probably used to seeing in Smithville. I can add stuff to the web page I can do more images, I can do some code examples. Here's kind of an infographic of between conventional zoning on the left, kind of your zoning design guidelines. It gets you a hybrid, and then form-based on the right. So. And I think we can look at some of the, part of this project includes an economic study. So we can look at what was done for demographics and with the comp plan, we're going to look at, current economic data, land uses, retail, commercial uses, things like that. We can do some calculation, what's like how much do you think of, commercial is going to grow over the next so many years? And then that might not dictate the type of uses that you want, but it'll set us up for a realistic expectation of how it might develop and how quickly it might develop.
So you're going to send us the website and we can look at it after the session here, I assume?
Yes, I
Okay.
can put it in the chat, and then I think and then I don't know who sent if Gina sent the email for tonight, she can share it out as well in an email.
I can email it out this evening as well.
I have lots of windows open, so let me get to the right one. Oh, that's because I'm looking at it. I was looking. Sorry.
It's asking me for a password, user email address and password when I click that link.
Oh, it is?
Yeah.
Okay. Let me hold on then.
Yeah, it's asking for a username and password.
Okay, let's not do it that way then. So I don't want you to have to do that.
I assume it'll just have us create our own username and password. through some
It
invitation.
can, but then I can send you this one. If I send you this link's longer, but you should not have to do it because I had a couple people at work open it today.
Yeah, I'm in this one.
That one
Okay.
works. Yeah.
Okay.
And Gina, you'll email these to us later?
Yes, I'll email it to everyone so the people who weren't able to be here tonight can still interact on there.
Now, I have a question for Cynthia and you, Gina. This is about the sunshine laws. If we run into each other and say, hey, what do you think about this idea? A little brainstorming, is there a sunshine element here that we aren't supposed to talk to each other about this? That kind of thing.
You would want to avoid having a quorum,
Okay,
and I would just advise probably just saving some of the discussion just for like your actual regular meetings.
okay. So if I have any other questions, I would contact Cynthia, you, Jack, that kind of thing. Got it. Okay.
Yeah. And then the online portal, like you can interact. I don't know, Julie explained like you can like react to people's comments like with the thumbs up or thumbs down. So you can also like this
Okay.
online portal, you can talk back and forth.
Okay.
But I would say this is this is an open process also. I wouldn't have a lot of conversation with other members of boards that you're on, but as you're talking to the public, to let them know that this is something you're looking at and soliciting feedback from them and letting them know once these portals go live as well.
Okay.
When you do enter a comment, though, you will have to enter a screen name, and you can just type anything. It's not like a login or anything. I don't know if Gina and Jack have thoughts on that. If you want the type of board they're on identified, or yeah. And then the other thing is, I would say is that Gina has I emailed her a copy of the PowerPoint, but there also is a link on the web page as well. And we were going to do these 3 questions tonight. If you want to do them, or if you just want to think about it and do them later, we can do that as well. I know it's a lot of information, a lot of thoughts, and different things to think about. So
I'd prefer to think. Everybody else can do what they want to do tonight. I've just had a very, very long day. So I'm sure others have too, but I would like to think about some things for a bit. It's been a lot of information to take in.
is there anything else? Questions? Comments? Again, I feel like it was pretty intensive on or a lot of conversation around design. But it doesn't have to be written that way either. I think you can still achieve what you want by just addressing other anything else that you want, or other things as well. So there anything that you want me to touch on, Jack or Gina, that I forgot about or didn't?
Do you want to go over kind of just the timeline of the project of like next steps?
Yeah, so next steps is, we'll give you a couple weeks to think about this and get some input. And I get a notice anytime somebody answers a question or leaves a comment or something. So, if people start, if it's been a week and then 3 days later nobody has interacted, we can start wrapping it up as well, the website up as well. But we'll be continuing to be in touch with Jack and Gina about kind of how this is going to play out and take your input and their input and have discussions over the next month probably. Start kind of creating an outline of what we're getting and what's important. And in those conversations, we can make updates to this website as well. And we'll come back and have a touch point. And we don't have a specific date yet, but we'll come back and go over kind of the results, the outline, and the direction it's headed with you guys as well and get feedback again.
Jack, did you have anything else to add?
No, that's what I was reading through and looking and thinking, and no, I think we're headed down the right path anyway. The only thing I would add is that I would encourage everyone to actually engage this online stuff. The sooner the better, and ultimately those kind of comments and survey responses are what we're really going to need. So really get that going. And I know several people were here and left, and Gina, it may behoove us to send them a direct link to all the people, including the ones, and encouraging them to get on it and do the survey as soon as they can. But that's all I have.
All right. Then I think we're probably good to wrap up unless there's any other questions for Julie.
So somebody did leave the comment. Rob asked if we have developers in the group and he thinks it would be good to get their input and and have a discussion with them. If Jack and Gina, we can talk about that separately if you think that that's something we need to do, have a different focus group or something like that. We can talk about that. I'll take your lead on that.
Yeah, I think it's something we need to at least consider where that goes. Yeah.
Yeah, and Dan, sorry, I'm just looking through the comments right now. And Dan had one earlier too about how restrictive some of the developments are getting in Kansas City. And that does happen, especially when you have, I've seen that with planned communities that are very planned, very specific as to especially when it gets to design and architectural types and where certain things can and can't go. I think, in talking with Jack and Gina and again with the history from the comp plan, it seems like it's important that we maintain that flexibility with whatever the end product is. So that's something we're definitely keeping in mind as we move forward.
Hey, it's Alicia. I just got on a little bit ago. Can everybody hear me? Yeah, okay. This may be like completely out of left field and it may have already been discussed or it may not be pertinent, but just a tiny bit of history with that little spot right there. my husband actually is farming some of that land right now, and they are renting it from some folks that haven't owned it for forever, just in case when everyone's out talking to the community. I know some folks get like really upset or defensive about, oh, they're pushing out all these farmers or whatever. That's not really the case with this one. So if anybody gives you any pushback about that, uh, they don't have to get super worked up about it. Just because I know how some folks in our small town like to defend all those families that have been around for forever, and I totally get it. But just if that does come up, that's not the case on a lot of that ground, I don't think. So sorry if that's out of line, but I just wanted to throw that out there from a personal point of view.
I think that's a good comment, a good thought. I think it's an overlay zoning districts functions just like a normal zoning district, so it has to be approved the same way. It has to go to P&Z. It'll have to go to the Board of Aldermen for approval. So there'll be a public input session even if this doesn't involve general public outreach, there will be a public touch point at some point. And I think that messaging will be important. And just because there is this plan and this overlay, it doesn't mean that it's happening tomorrow, or it doesn't mean that it's happening this way. So
thank you.
And Alicia, I'll go one step further than what Julie did, and that is that same concept applies to our comprehensive plan. The comprehensive plan calls for land that is either ag or not even in the city in some cases. It calls it out to be industrial or mixed use or whatever it may be. It doesn't mean that it has to go that way, but what it does mean is that the planning commission must consider what the comprehensive plan says, and in this case, they would have to consider what the overlay district says in making a determination. Somebody wants to put up something, they're going to have to come for a rezone to change it, and they'll have to have, a pretty significant reason. The purpose of this overlay district is to be quite frank, it will eventually increase the value of this property for sale when these folks are ready to retire or are ready to sell, because a developer is going to look at it from the perspective, I've had a chance to look at this, I can make something work there. I'll buy this land and this is what it's going to cost me. So I think it takes that into account either way. But yeah, very good point.
anything else for this evening?
Doesn't sound like it, Julie. I would like to thank you for moderating this and for all the work you've done so far, and I know all the work you're going to be doing soon. Thank you.
No problem at all. Yep, I'll keep an eye on the webpage and make sure everybody's comments are getting addressed or shared out and questions answered.
All right. And I will send an email after we log off with the link to the website and then a copy of the slide deck as well. So thank you all for making time in your busy schedules to be here tonight. We appreciate it. Have a good evening. Thank you.
Thank you.